Hi everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm excited to spend the next hour or so doing a deep dive into what product management and climate looks like. My name is Natalie Lavery, and I'm the marketing lead at a climate tech recruitment agency called Climate People. Essentially, we work with climate companies, any company that's working on a climate solution, and then job seekers from all different backgrounds that are interested in climate, and hopefully pair the two together with the sole mission of getting as many people working on climate solutions as possible. So, thank you again for being here today to help us act on that mission and hopefully get more and more people jobs in climate. So, some background kind of on the whole premise of today's event is, as you likely know if you're here, we need hundreds of millions of people working in climate by the end of this decade to address the demands of the climate crisis. And as you may or may not have noticed, a lot of the people who are currently in climate or looking for climate jobs are those people who are innately passionate about this space. They have a background in environmental or climate, and they really want to get a job in this space, and that's incredible. But in order to fully move the needle and get those hundreds of millions of people that I just mentioned working in this space, we have to find ways to meet people where they are and give them resources to show them the possibilities of a career in climate. Because you likely probably didn't know in the very infancy of your search that product management roles in climate existed. I certainly didn't know that there was anything out there for people who weren't environmentalists and scientists. So the point of today, again, is to bring in experts in various disciplines and have them share their stories and talk about their backgrounds and answer any questions you have to fully open that door and hopefully remove some of those barriers that are preventing product managers from getting a job in this space. So the format for today is I'm going to ask Andre, who I'll introduce in a few seconds, 15 or so minutes of questions just to kind of set the stage for today. And then I want to open the door to all of you to ask all of your questions and really get some clarification on your search. So please hold your questions until I open it up. Once I do, you can either feel free to raise your hand. If you click on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, you can raise your hand. Or if you don't want to unmute yourself and ask, you can go ahead and put it in the chat and I will read it off for you. Quick note, this is a meeting, so that means that you're more than welcome to have your camera on. It can be an engaging discussion, no pressure, but it would be great to see all your faces. But then also with that, you can unmute yourself. So please be courteous and keep yourself muted while other people are talking. We don't want to really hear your side conversations. But then, yeah, you can also unmute yourself when it's your turn to chat and you can ask the questions yourself. So yeah, that's kind of the outline or the platform for today. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Andre. He is the head of product at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. I'm going to let him further introduce himself because he can do a better job at that than I certainly can. But just wanted to say thank you so much, Andre, for being here, for taking the time to share your expertise with all of us and really inspire some people to get a job in climate. It really means a lot to me, and I'm sure it does to all of our audience as well. So with that, let's go ahead and kick things off to optimize the 55 minutes we have left for today. So yeah, Andre, like I said, would you mind go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Of course. So my name is André Meurer. I am head of product at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, as Natalie just said. I have been doing this job for about 4.5 months now, so it's still early days. This is my first climate job. I've been on a long journey to get into climate, as sure most of you are now, or have been, or will be. And it's, frustrating and exhilarating and in equal doses. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride, and I can talk about what my journey has been. But a little bit of background on me. So I started out as a back-end engineer, sort of building all kinds of software, really, from e-commerce platforms for supermarkets to auditing tools for big telco, really all kinds of sort of B2B and B2C, without really a particular industry focused. I worked in professional services all of my career in technology consulting firms. I jumped around a fair bit. I moved countries 5 times in the past 20 years. I'm originally from Brazil, but I've lived in New Zealand, in the UK, in the US, in a few other places. And each move kind of allowed me to try different roles each time. So I worked as a software engineer, as a consultant, as an architect. I did a bit of a stint on technical sales, as an engineering manager, as PM. And in my last job, I spent about 5 years leading a technology innovation team for a global strategy consulting firm called Oliver Wyman. That's when I had my first formal product role as chief product officer for an internal startup. We were creating merchandising optimization tools for large retailers. Think clients like Walmart and so on. And that was a fun ride, great experience. But really, at around COVID, I had what you might call a mid-career crisis. I had been working with some really smart people, a challenging kind of environment, high visibility projects, big budgets. It was great pay. And I really just wasn't happy. I think ultimately I wasn't passionate enough about making big banks and big supermarkets more profitable. It's great work if you enjoy it. It has to be done by someone, but it really wasn't my calling. Basically, I decided that I wasn't putting my talents to the best use. So I decided it was time to go and save the world, as it were. So probably a familiar story to many people here. As to how I kind of transitioned and kind of found a climate job, it was really kind of an 18-month sort of process from the moment I kind of decided that I'm going to do this until I actually my first day working for the BDC. You know, at the beginning, I spent several months kind of treading water, not knowing where to begin. I was effectively resorted to going on LinkedIn and looking for all those dream jobs that were presumably out there. I found, ultimately, I found some online communities like My Climate Journey, Work on Climate. Happy to talk about those as well. I worked really hard then to kind of build a network in climate from scratch, basically. I reached out to people. I was ignored quite a lot, but I also made some great connections. And, you know, I leveraged others who I had met for warm intros and kind of grew the network like that. I did apply to several roles, mostly in product at all levels. All of the cold applications were effectively a waste of time from my point of view. I heard nothing back. And I did get a few interviews through like recommendations and warm intros. But it took me a while to really kind of sharpen my story about what I could bring into the space and why I was making this whole career transition and kind of moving from a very kind of consulty sort of corporate world to you know, a startup rich space. Was that was a bit of a challenge as well. I think what made the most difference in the end was the effort that I put into learning and writing about climate, as you know, in addition to the network building. There's no denying that like not having climate, like specific climate experience, puts people at somewhat of a disadvantage. However, it is a new sector that's growing, and by definition, that needs people who don't have sector experience. So climate companies are, you know, willing to take that into consideration. But I think it's important to demonstrate passion and that you're interested into the space. You're not just like trying to ride the climate wave, as it were. So that's why I kind of started writing about it, to really demonstrate to potential employers that I was serious about this move. So, you know, all of the networking, the learning, and the writing, there was a lot of work. It's kind of difficult to realize when you're in the middle of it, but that's really what made the difference. I was effectively making my own luck. And then I got lucky and I got connected with the right people, with the founder of the BDC, and then like the rest is history. So I'll pause there. There was a long kind of journey description, but I'm happy to get into any of those points.
Yeah, I think you brought up so many incredible points there about how the climate job search, especially in product roles, is very different than it would be in a traditional space. It's very much about, like you said, creating a name for yourself, learning your personal brand. I would even go as far to say, and yeah, I'm sure Andre, you'd be happy to share links to some of those blog posts that you've written as well. But yeah, I think he brought up a lot of incredible points there about how, if you're going to go about your climate job search in the product space, so much of it is by who you know, what you're learning, and what you're doing. And I think we're definitely going to dive into that a little bit more today. But I think that was a great way to set the tone for today's conversation about that. Andre, would you mind touching a little bit more on your day-to-day and what you currently do in your role, and what that looks like, and then two, how that was different than it was in other industries that you've worked in?
Right. So yeah. So what I'm doing today? So I am head of product for the BDC, and what that means is really we are building a whole set of kind of digital tools and resources to help people electrify. So the Building Decarbonization Coalition, the main sort of mission of the org is to align the various stakeholders along the electrification universe, right? So this, it includes things like, policymakers, manufacturers, contractors, and consumers, and everything else in between. So the BDC does a lot of like policy and research work. There's a big kind of a market transformation practice to align all of the stakeholders along the supply chain. And my role specifically is focused on the consumer inspiration division of the company. So we have a campaign called The Switch Is On, which is mostly active in California right now, and we are working to kind of bring that to the whole nation. And that's effectively what my job is. But like today is to really figure out a product strategy for us to move from a California-centric campaign to a United States-centric one. And it means, that there's the Switch Is On website itself, and all of the content and resources that we have there to sort of educate and inspire people to electrify their homes, as well as a set of tools that can help people on their journey. So something like how to find the best contractors to do the work, how to access the incentives and the rebates that are provided by local, state, and federal programs to help you do your electrification projects. So it's really about working with the rest of the BDC to understand where we want to get to in terms of the goals of the BDC and the goals of the electrification movement, and setting out a product strategy that's going to get us there. Now, how that's different from my previous jobs, I think it's less to do with climate necessarily, because I think something that I've realized, and that people had told me as I was kind of looking for a climate opportunity, I'd never really internalized that until now, is that like a climate job is really just a job. And if you're working for a climate tech company in a product role, you're going to be doing product work, right? So that's what it feels like day to day, right? So I'm doing user research. I am doing a landscape market competitive sort of analysis. I'm going deep in the data to understand, to try and make better data-driven decisions, to understand how people are using the website, how they can get value out of it. I'm trying to come up with new features. I am hiring a team, to kind of do carry out and execute all of that work. So it feels very much like product work, except that obviously the end goal is within, is to kind of move the needle on the building electrification space. I think that the main difference is that the BDC in particular is an organization that's traditionally done like policy and research and doesn't have, historically, it hasn't had a technology, a product team. So, within the switches on sphere, like we are kind of building those capabilities right now to enable us to progress at speed. So right now it feels very much like a startup, like we are building a business. We're coming up with a business strategy. We're trying to execute on it. We're trying to find product market fit in a way. But I'm doing that with like few resources. So I'm kind of doing a lot of the hands-on work myself, working with third-party firms that do some of the development work for us, and I'm working to kind of build this team to bring a little bit more of that capability in-house.
Yeah, definitely. One of the main themes that Andre and I discussed when we were having our pre-webinar chat about what we wanted to cover was what he just hinted at, the fact that climate jobs and product are not that much different than any other industry, except for the fact that you're working on something that you're passionate about and the end goal. Like your product job is going to be remarkably similar. And something that a lot of job seekers that I talk to get caught up on is transitioning to this new industry. I don't have that 10 years of climate experience, but as Andre hinted to, is he popped around industries a lot in his previous endeavors, and that was never like a big deal. And then somehow that mental block pops up in a lot of job seekers and they're switching to climate is I don't have climate experience. And it's like, Andre, did you have grocery experience before you got in? Was it? Yeah, Walmart. Yeah. So
Right.
I think that's something really big that I wanted to touch on today. So I think that was a great point, Andre. And
Yeah, just to reinforce that, Nelly, I think it's super important. Like I had that mental block myself initially. I'm like, okay, I'm not a scientist. I don't have any, climate background. How the hell am I going to get into the space? I think it's a natural concern to have. And, just like any other industry, like having sector experience is beneficial. But it's not the only way to get there. And yeah, once you kind of focus a bit more on what you can bring to this role, then I think you kind of shift the conversation a little, because not every company in climate is looking to only hire people with climate experience.
yeah, definitely. They want the passion. They want you to
Right.
they want you to show that you've done your homework, you understand, and that you have the knowledge, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that concrete experience.
Yeah, and I think what we ourselves in the BDC, like I've now had, started to get a bit more involved in recruitment for my team as well as for others, and that passion, really to be able to demonstrate that you're not just passionate about sort of addressing climate change, but also that you're particularly passionate and interested about electrification and building electrification, it becomes super important. I think that's one of the points about the search. Is one of the things that I kind of learned early on, thankfully, was that narrowing the field of search was super useful. You might feel like that you'd be happy to do anything in climate. That was certainly my case. But I felt that if I was approaching conversations with companies, with other people in that manner, it's kind of difficult to move the conversation forward. It's so super generic. Like I was talking to some founders about, my first prompt to them was, oh, I want to work in climate, right? And they were like, well, I'm trying to fix this really specific problem about, say, soil measurements, and so the climate thing, yes, it's part of that problem, but it really, people want to have more specific conversations about the thing that they're trying to solve, rather than I'm interested in climate. So narrowing the focus I found to be super important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And that is in terms of climate sector, that's in terms of type of job, that's in terms of company. Really, quality over quantity is something I cannot reiterate enough. Definitely. Cool. So I think we really did a good job there, Andre, setting the tone for the conversation. And I want to make sure we share or save enough time for audience questions. I know we had a few that we got in advance, so we'll make sure to get to those. But I will start with the question that Emily just asked in the chat. And so now is your time. If you want to go ahead and drop questions in the chat, please do. If you want to raise your hand, go for it. Another feature is in the chat if you want to upvote questions, and I will read off the questions that get the most upvotes first to make sure, yeah, we're addressing the questions that the most people have. So with that, from Emily, Andre, we have, could you share more about the work-life balance that you've seen in climate roles? After burning out at a climate startup as their first hire, I'm very eager to find the right culture fit that balances meaningful work with sustainable work practices and expectations. It seems like climate companies tend to skew more towards startup-like companies versus more balanced and established companies, since climate is that new field. Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know, Andre, you mentioned that you were one of the first technical hires, and that encompasses a lot of legwork to make that happen. So do you have any comments on what you've seen in terms of that during your job search?
Yeah, so I think first thing to be clear that I am just one data point. If it wasn't clear by now, I actually don't have a lot of climate experience myself. This is my first climate job, and I'm 4 months in. And certainly, I have a data point of one company. I think, having said all that, I'm always happy to share my opinion. I think it is true that climate overall is kind of over-indexed on like earlier stage startups. I think just by dint of being a new sector, by and large. And I think with that, you do see more sort of work-life balance challenges. Now, that's not true of every company. Thinking of the BDC specifically, I mean, I could work 18-hour days if I let myself do it. I think a lot of it is the boundaries that you're prepared to draw for yourself in terms of the hours or the mental sort of energy that you can dedicate to it. I was, before coming into climate, I was working for a very, a pretty large corporation, global strategy consulting firm. People are burning out there. Working as consultants allocated on client sites, working very, very long hours. And I think I think the burnout has some to do with like the amount of hours and energy that you put into work, but also with like how much purpose you see in the work that you're doing, and how fulfilled you feel about you're doing something good. So I think I'm actually working longer hours today than I was before I got into climate, and I feel less stressed out. I feel happier. I feel so it's a combination of both things, I think. But I would say that I'm sure that there's some companies in climate that are going to work you to the bone, and some will have a better culture that will sort of give you more space and a better kind of work-life balance. I mean, again, like, just because a company is in climate doesn't mean that it's going to be a great experience. Like, climate companies are just companies, right? So you want to make sure that you find somewhere with a good culture that fits your sort of work-life balance requirements or constraints.
Absolutely. And the only thing I'd add to that is, I think this is one of the biggest parts of the job search is vetting companies. A lot of times job seekers forget that they're interviewing the company as much as the company is interviewing them. So when you are doing the interview process, ask those tricky questions, try to get a gauge of what they're going to expect from you. And then, as Andre said, like, setting boundaries is just as much on you as it is them. And then also, I've seen a lot of product positions popping up at more established companies. So a lot of times, in what the companies that Climate People works with, is a lot of the smaller scale climate startups are hiring like highly technical people, and then later on they're hiring their more supporting roles. And oftentimes at that stage, it's not really the same scrappy wear a million hats startup environment as it would have been in an early stage. And again, as Andre said, it's very company dependent. So make sure you're vetting the company just as much as they're vetting you. But yeah, it's definitely a really important topic to consider. Cool. Next question that we have in the chat is, what tips do you have starting out to add wait, I'm gonna start that over. What tips do you have starting out and adding value in the first few weeks of your job search? Or does this mean job search shutdown or your first few weeks of starting at the company, or both?
I mean, the first few weeks of starting at the company, like
Okay.
you're new to climate, right? Like you might not be able to provide as much value. I was wondering like how you approach that.
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't, again, maybe this is becoming a bit of a theme, and I don't think that would be that much different if you were getting, starting a job that wasn't in climate. I think you start out with sort of understanding what it's like, just getting the lay of the land, right? Like I've actually just had someone new join my team a couple days ago, and I want to make sure that she has a great kind of onboarding experience. I have just gone through that myself, and I understand how confusing and disorienting it can be. Like there's new names, there's new acronyms, there's a kind of a new language, there's all these things going around you that you don't really understand. So I think taking the time to onboard properly, understand how the company works, understand who's who, understand what people care about, like who are the main decision makers, who are the stakeholders, what is the company strategy. I think all of that to me is supremely important as rather than trying to find ways to sort of be adding value in week one. I think the best way to add value in the first 3 months is to really spend the first few weeks sort of trying to get at the lay of the land and really understanding what the strategy is and who's who, so that you can really accelerate how you're going to add value. That's my take on it anyway. Yeah, does that help, Tatiana?
Yeah, that helps.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Is people forget that the learning doesn't stop as soon as or shouldn't stop as soon as you get your foot in the door. Like it has to, especially in climate, it's such an ever evolving space. There's new stuff every single day. So staying on top of that and learning as much as you can is definitely super important.
Yeah, can I just add, Natalie? Yeah, like that is so true. Like one of the areas that I was interested in my job search was electrification, like in general. So I was fortunate to find something, within that space, focused on buildings. And I had learned a little bit before then, but I was almost like I was kind of thinking of electrification kind of more in transportation and EVs, because I'm kind of interested in that. At the end of the day, that's not what I'm doing today, but I'm spending a lot of time just like getting familiar with the building decarb space. The BDC does a lot of policy work, like understanding policy is super important. So I'm finding myself getting deep into sort of legislation that's being passed in different cities across the country, and how to best electrify a home or a type of home. What are the steps in the process? What are the challenges with, say, getting heat pumps to work well? So yeah, it's a constant learning process, and that space is moving very, very, very quickly. Like there's new products, there's new technology coming into space, there's new legislation, there's like political pushback, and yeah, it feels like things change on a daily basis. So being on top of that is a lot of work, but also because I care about it, it's pretty exciting, and it feels like time well spent.
Yeah, that's a great point. It makes your job more exciting when you actually care and you're intrigued by it personally and professionally. Yeah. Cool. Stephanie, you want to go for it?
Yeah, thanks so much for facilitating this webinar. It's super interesting. And Andrea, I can relate to a lot of the points that you have been making. Really happy you're mentioning that. You said that product work at the end of the day at a climate company is product work and no specialized knowledge is really needed. You also mentioned that this is a very quickly moving space. I'm still wondering whether there's a program that you could recommend. There's like universities coming out with programs that are super expensive. TerraDo has a program. Is there anything that you can recommend that would kickstart the process that gives you just more confidence when you're going into like an interview process, for example?
Yeah, great question. I Yeah, so I can talk about what kind of worked for me and how I got value from these programs. One, to be clear, like I think, there's a big debate in a product. It feels like a perennial debate about like, is the sort of industry expertise more important than the kind of product management discipline? Now, I have my views on that, but I think at the end of the day, they're both super important. Like I could not do my job if I didn't have the product experience and, very quickly now picking up the sort of content expertise. So clearly both very important, especially in a product role. I think much more so than engineering or most other roles. Now, going to the question that you actually asked about, like the resources. So there's a lot of stuff out there. I do have a few that I can recommend. Actually, I see Ben Lai on the call. So Ben and I put together a bit of a Google Doc with a whole bunch of climate resources that we can certainly point you to. That's likely a little outdated by now, unless Ben has been keeping it up to date. I haven't, because again, the space is moving so quickly. There's so many new resources coming out. But I would say that for me, what worked was certainly Terra was a big help. So Terra.do Learning for Action program, I felt that was a great investment. And because that gives you a great kind of foundational knowledge, kind of all aspects of climate. I did hear that Climate Base now has a similar such program. I'm not familiar with it, but probably worth checking out as well. In terms of product specifically, like I have become a fan and a big user of Reforge. I've been doing that well before climate for the past couple of years now, and I find that that's been super useful. So again, I'm not affiliated, and Reforge is actually pretty expensive, but if your company can afford it, it's a great resource to have. And we should link some resources on the chat. I will ping everybody this blog post that I wrote more or less recently, kind of talking about the climate journey, a lot of the same points that I make here. And at the end, there are some resources there that that people can navigate to. And there's a ton more. I'm sure many people here know about many more valuable resources. And there's like compilations of resources in a number of different places that I can't think of any one specific now, but like there's often social media posts, especially LinkedIn, I found to be a good place to kind of be in touch with all of that. And there's often some great list of resources coming out there. But check out the end of this blog post. Excuse me. There's a link there to the document that Ben and I put together.
Thank you, André.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll include that in the follow-up email too. So no stress if you don't get the click the link now. You can get it in the email after. Awesome. I'm going to do one from chat, and then I'll get to the two of you that have your hand raised. We'll kind of do like a switch. So Aline says, you mentioned that the BDC has historically focused more on policy issues than in tech. How important was policy knowledge for your role? If so, how do you ramp up your policy know-how before starting?
I frankly think that the BDC should have grilled me more on my policy knowledge than they did. Excuse me. I had none, zero. It was one of the things that had me excited about the role, the fact that I was going to be exposed to this type of work. And it's frankly not like fundamental to the role that I play, but understanding like policy, how policy gets passed and how it gets drawn up in the role of the BDC and kind of think tanks and kind of lobbying and all that is interesting and kind of adjacent to the work that I do. So definitely important knowledge to have, but not needed. And I'm doing fine and I'm enjoying learning about it.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like it's kind of similar to the industry knowledge. It's just if you can prove that you have the capabilities to pick it up quickly, then that's the most important part. Awesome. Cool. I think you were next, Sean, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it keeps the order, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Andre, I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your journey, and I was particularly interested when you mentioned it was kind of like an 18-month switch. I myself have been searching for 8 months, and I'm curious how you dealt with rejection in your job search, and how that maybe reframed some of your job search strategy as you encountered rejection from the climate space.
Yeah, rejection can be tough, and part of the journey really. Yeah, look, it's tough. I think the main thing is not to take it personally. Natalie will know this better than me, but I think right now there's a very, very large talent pool of very talented people trying to get into climate, still following the big tech layoffs, which haven't really finished. Like, we're still at kind of the tail end of that. Some are kind of still happening. I think a good portion of those people are trying to find more meaning and purpose in work, so they're flocking to climate. Because also there's like all these news articles coming out that climate is the big new thing. So I have a sense that it is particularly difficult to be looking for a job in climate now. So I think it's important to not take rejection personally, because it is going to happen. Like, I came into this journey kind of feeling that I had a lot of experience, some pretty good skills that I could bring to this space, and I was spending quite a lot of effort in sort of crafting these applications, getting my CV just right, writing a dedicated cover letter, doing background research on the company and the people who I was going to be talking to, everybody who worked there. And yet I would hear like nothing back. So it's easy to get frustrated, but it's important not to get discouraged. I think, because some of these roles in climate, I think especially in product and software engineering might be similar, are getting like 1,000+ applicants like per job opening. So I mean, very talented people are bound to be to slip through the cracks and just be rejected. So like, don't take it personally. And it was super useful to have other people to talk to. So I was lucky enough that I was laid off in October last year, and as part of the package, I was fortunate enough that there was career coach, for something like 6 months. So I had someone to talk to, someone who would sort of help me deal with all of the rejections that I was getting, and it's important to kind of flip that around and use that as an opportunity to kind of sharpen the narrative, go and work a little bit more on my personal brand, on my LinkedIn profile, do a bit more learning so I can post something interesting in the space that I want to get to, and and try and take the rejection as, okay, what can I do better? How can I better sort of tell my story next time? But it's tough, man.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only thing that I would add to that is we had a webinar a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if any of y'all were on it, but it was with a career coach from Career Sprout. And his whole thing was like, you're wasting your time if you're just applying for jobs. You need to be networking, and networking, like he said, 70% of your time for networking, 30% of your time to applying. And I found that when you're networking and kind of going about applying for jobs that route, the rejections don't kind of sting as hard, because you actually have personal connections, and you don't really view that rejection as a waste of your time, because it's just opening the door to another opportunity. And his really good piece of advice that stuck with me was, say you reach out to 10 people and you have 10 networking conversations and 8 of them ignore you. One of them you talk to and they don't have a job for you. And then one of them ends up having a job and you get that job. Are you going to even think twice about the 9 that didn't lead to anything? Or are you going to fixate on the 1 that did lead to something? So I think that same logic can be applied to job applications too. It's like rejections suck, they're hard, they're inevitable. But if you kind of view them as like the stepping stones, that's going to lead you to where you're going to get your job. It's kind of just the way you're framing it. And again, way easier said than done. So I know I want to take a moment to recognize how hard that is, but it is important to try to remain optimistic, as hard as that actually may be. But yeah, definitely, the numbers are hard and can be demoralizing.
Yeah, there's a comment on the chat saying 1 out of 10 is very, very optimistic, which I agree.
Yeah.
Now, I think another angle there is and this is how networking, one of the aspects where networking helped me was that I got to meet enough people within climate that at some point I was like, the interesting opportunities that were being advertised, I could probably dig up someone who worked there through one of the connections that I had made. So I actually managed to get warm intros and referrals in some cases to some of those roles, which actually led to a couple of interviews. But had I not had the network, I'm positive that they would just have ignored my application. Right. So there's that aspect of networking is like increases your chances of getting the interviews if you're using your network the right way. I think like definitely before you apply, I mean, I certainly did this and I feel that it helped. Every time I applied, before I did, I would check like, is there anybody who I know who works there? Or is there anybody who I know who knows someone who works there? Right. And MCJ, My Climate Journey, and even Work on Climate to some extent can be great communities for like finding people who work in those companies and might be happy to sort of make the right introduction to the right person.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Shinja, you can go on. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
Shalendra, that's okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting this together, and also thanks for the Career Sprout meeting, which I did attend, which was very valuable. I am a product manager for 13 plus years across discipline. I strongly believe, Andre, that the product manager of all the roles is one of those roles that sits right in the intersection of business and technical, and can flex themselves and add real value to the company. So I've myself worked for B2B, B2C products, was laid off from T-Mobile. I work for DevOps company called JFrog right now. I find that for me, that transition was pretty drastic in terms of when I started with this small company. My first month, I was like, what am I going to do here? I don't even know the language they speak. But 9 months in, I'm actually adding real value now and recognized across the company. I feel it's going to be the same. I mean, I'm reading all sorts of books about
Oh,
climate.
that's a good book.
I educate myself. I read Overheated by Kate Aronoff. That's fantastic. I'm very passionate about climate change myself, inculcate it in my personal life. So these things are definitely going to help. But in terms of product manager discipline, do you see that from the inside in terms of the value a product manager brings, and especially having demonstrated success across different industries? Is that something that's valued when they look at candidates?
Do you mean value the project management discipline as opposed to the industry?
Yeah, the product
expertise?
management discipline. I think you touched on it before when you were talking about climate experience and product management, but particularly for BDC, how open are you for product manager candidates that have demonstrated that have worked across industries, kind of? Yeah.
So again, I mean, this is a perennial debate within the product universe. I am of the view that the product discipline, sort of experience in product, is or should be of more value than strictly speaking, the content expertise. Now, to be clear, like they're both very important, right? So if I find a candidate that has both, I mean, I'm definitely going to focus on that. But having product experience, understanding how to find a product strategy and take something from idea through to launch, and then beyond. I mean, to me, that's a skill set that's more difficult to learn and to pick up than industry, just about any industry knowledge.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was hoping as well.
Yeah. Now, look, different companies will see that in different ways, and there's plenty of articles out there talking about that. You wouldn't hire a CFO that didn't have a lot of financial experience. You wouldn't hire a CTO that didn't have a lot of tech experience. But for some reason, companies are happy to hire CPOs and heads of product who don't have any product experience but have the industry experience. Now, again, I think, I don't think this is a climate thing specifically, at least not that I have seen. But it's certainly out there and it's a challenge.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Next question that we have in the chat is from Andre. So Andre to Andre, can you get more in detail about the strategies or approaches that you've used in your job search that worked out the most?
Right. So I'd say, so certainly the things that I felt worked best for me, three things: the networking, the learning about climate in general, and more specifically the area that I wanted to focus on, and the content sharing, for lack of a better term. And this is just like the brand building, right? Or being, when you're trying to convince a potential employee to even look at your application, like being passionate about climate is, sadly not enough. You need to demonstrate that, because people need to see it, right? And for me, what they meant was really when sharpening up my LinkedIn profile, which is really a process that took months, right? Like dirty secret, I hate LinkedIn. I hate it with a passion, right? But it's, I have my job thanks to LinkedIn, right? Thanks to connections that I made through LinkedIn, and the presence, the brand that I built on LinkedIn, and other adjacent things like my Substack, for instance, right? Like I started writing that blog so that I could get a job in climate. That was the only reason, right? Now, I ended up having a lot of fun with it, and I'm still enjoying it. I'm still kind of posting because I want to, but it was really that had the specific goal of kind of rounding out my sort of online public brand. So those three, well, it was really like the networking and the brand was really the two things that, in my opinion, made the difference. Obviously, I wouldn't have been able to sort of build that brand without a lot of the learning, because it's really like trying to make interesting points, have an interesting angle, have something to say that other people want to spend 5 to 10 minutes, or sometimes half an hour of their time on, is important. So I think like the learning, and perhaps I'm lucky that I'm fairly opinionated about things, and make some provocative and controversial points sometimes, but that I think all helps kind of round up that public persona. So to me, that's what made a difference. Again, I applied for many jobs. I get zero traction. So that at some point I decided, okay, I'm done with that. It's not yielding any results. I'm going to focus on the networking and this content stuff, and in the hope that that would like create the conditions that would lead me to the right opportunity. And it did. So, but again, I'm one data point.
Yeah, but I would argue
I'm just one guy with his opinions. So.
From what I've seen, your situation is pretty universal. I would argue that 90% of the people I talk to get their jobs through networking in this
Right.
space. And sucks, but it's also kind of fun, maybe. I don't know. It's
It is.
nonetheless,
Yeah, I
it's,
think so.
yeah, making connections, and yeah, it's gonna yield way more results, I promise. Cool. Switching, I'm going down to the bottom of the chat because Ben's question got an upvote, so we'll go with that one. Ben says, Andre, how did you learn about climate mitigation and about electrification in specific? How much of it was learning on your own versus formal programs like Terra or a sustainability MBA? And has it helped you either in finding a job or in coming up to speed in your current job?
Yeah, so let me start from, hi Ben. Let me start from the end. Like, I can't really speak to sustainability MBA. I have never done one. I know people who have. That feels to me like a pretty hefty investment, financially and also time-wise. I'd love to have one, but I can't find myself as driven enough to pursue it. I think a program like Terra was great for many reasons. One is it helps with the networking, right? And our Terra cohort, we had this there group of people who were all kind of job searching. We got together periodically. We sort of exchanged tips and advice, and so it was great for the networking. But I think it was really kind of a hub that would point you to a lot of super valuable content. Or at the very least, it will tell you about the things that were important that I could then go and do my own research, and that just Googling, right, and subscribing to a lot of interesting newsletters. But I found it was a good kind of starting point to go down into quite a number of rabbit holes that I found were super useful. So it was a good kind of anchor to kind of structure my climate learning, I found. Now, you don't need to do Terra or Climate Base or any other fellowship in order to do that. Like I started, I had to learn a fair bit about climate before I started my Terra fellowship, and I just did that with newsletters. So Climate Tech VC, I thought was great. I actually don't read that much anymore, but I thought it was great. There's lots of great podcasts, Volts and Catalyst and many others. There's a ton of great resources there, and it takes a little bit of trial and error. Like you kind of need to find the voice that speaks to you and what you kind of enjoy listening to or reading, right? There's like different writing styles, there's different like points of view in climate. So I think it does take a little bit of trial and error to kind of find the things that you're most interested in pursuing. I think the learning has to be fun, right? So you have to find things that you're really enjoying. So that would be my tip.
I found that the My Climate Journey podcast is really great gateway drug, really.
Right. It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, they cover so many different things. So thanks, Andre. And hi.
Yeah, they're great. Couldn't recommend them more. Cool. So next question is from Matt. He says, thank you, Andre. This is a great conversation. And I agree that passion for the outcome is huge, particularly in product. Do you have any tips on ways that you were able to represent and show your passion for climate during the interview process, or just show you're primarily knowledgeable of the space?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the building that public brand, that persona, I think that's important. But like on the day of, as it were, like as you're like talking to people, I think that's where the narrowing of focus is super important. If you start a conversation, if you're just learning about climate in general, I don't think you're going to have a very focused, kind of specific, deep conversation about the matters, the problems that really matter to the person who is interviewing you, right? So you really like do a lot of background research on the company and what they are struggling with, the kind of climate solution that they have, and how does that fit into the overall kind of climate solution landscape? What are the adjacent solutions? So really like going deep into the space will prepare you to have much more interesting, much more in-depth conversations when you do get in front of someone, right? So that would be my tip, is to like focus your scope and go deep, and then you'll be able to have much more interesting and productive conversation. You'll be likely to impress the person, because you know that these startups are all struggling with a kind of a nascent and growing sector, right? A lot of the time they don't know what the hell they're doing, right? That's the nature of being at a startup. And you know, there are many things that they're struggling with. So like trying to find out what those things are, like, and have conversations around those. I mean, that's, you know, to me, that's the most interesting thing.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So we have time for one more question. Time has flown somehow, it always does. I want to end on the question from Teddy that says, are you seeing any particular skills or expertise, for example, AI, that are high demand in climate PMs?
Yeah, so I'm not, to be honest, but then again, I'm just one person. I have a pretty kind of narrow view of the whole space, despite being the one answering the questions today. But AI, large language models, I mean, definitely, right? Like, I don't think you can be a great product manager today without, at the very least, like having a great understanding of the kinds of capabilities and the kinds of things that you can get out of AI and large language models. You know, this is not something that I'm using specifically, but you know, it is something that I'm certainly trying to fit into. Like, you know, I'm looking to apply the right way, but I see a lot of opportunity for it. So, for instance, right, to have a chat GPT-like interface that's trained on specific kind of home electrification guidance and content, right, that can answer people's questions in a much better way. I think that could be pretty powerful. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm struggling with in my own role now, is like how to get the right education content to people, how to provide the right guidance. And I think something like that could be super useful. And, you know, you can get into all kinds of solution spaces there, from like wildfire prevention, biodiversity impact in investment portfolios. You know, there's a number of things where AI can be useful. So yes, definitely a skill to have if you're in product. Yes, please.
Awesome. Well, looks like we are at time. Again, I don't know how it went by so fast, but it certainly did. I just went ahead and dropped a link in the chat to a Google form. As we've touched on a lot throughout the past hour, power of networking in the space is huge. So if you want some curated warm connections from the people who are here, please go ahead and put your information in that form, and I'll share it with all of you, so that, again, we can have those connections starting from where we are today. So with that, thank you all so much.
Natalie, can I just say, so thanks everybody for coming. I don't know if we got through all of the questions or not, but if not, it'd be great to compile them. Yep. I commit to actually writing a blog post, like addressing all the questions that we didn't get to, and maybe some of the ones that we did get to,
yep,
and you know, maybe people who value that.
Yeah, for sure. I've taken note of the questions that we didn't get to, and yeah, I was going to follow up with that, André, cool, about getting all those questions answered, and then we'll send out a link to that blog post or whatever it turns into. But yeah, they were great questions, so we want to make sure we get them all answered. And then all the questions we got before the event, we still need to get to those too. So shout out to you guys for being such an engaged audience. But yeah, feel free to add André and me on LinkedIn, send any other further questions. We're happy to be there to support you in this journey. And thank you again for taking the time, and then for also wanting to get a job in this space. We really appreciate it. And then thank you, André. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, and I know everyone else did as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, have a good one, guys. Bye. Cheers.